everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be exploring something that I'm sure a lot of you are going through right now or have gone through recently: emerging adulthood.
Ooh, emerging adulthood. I love that term.
Yeah, it's basically that in-between phase, like no longer a teenager, but not quite feeling like a full-fledged grown-up yet.
Right, exactly. It's that time when you're kind of figuring out who you are and where you fit in the world.
Precisely. And we've got some awesome excerpts from a developmental psychology textbook that dives into this whole emerging adulthood thing. We're going to be looking at the health challenges, the relationship dynamics, and even what's going on in your brains during this crazy time.
Yes, we'll be debunking some myths about the brain, too. The
Yeah.
brain doesn't just stop developing after adolescence, folks. Buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride.
Absolutely. So to kick things off, let's talk about the whole concept of emerging adulthood as like its own distinct life stage.
Yeah, it's funny because for a long time, we didn't really recognize this phase as something separate. It's just like, okay, you're 18, you're an adult, good luck out there. But the reality is the path to adulthood is way different now than it was for, say, our parents' generation.
So true. Like back in the day, it was all about checking these boxes, right? Graduate high school, go to college, get a job, get married, buy a house, have kids, boom, you're an adult. But nowadays, it's like that whole script has been flipped on its head.
Exactly. Our source material actually talks about how there isn't one set path anymore. You've got some folks who dive right into starting a family, maybe skipping college altogether, while others jump straight into the workforce.
Right. And then you've got a whole bunch of people out there who are choosing to hold off on marriage and kids to focus on, building their careers or going back to school or pursuing their passions. It's like a choose your own adventure novel for adulthood.
I love that analogy. It really is. And what's really interesting is that research suggests that delaying those traditional milestones like getting married or having kids, it can actually be beneficial for you,
Mm.
especially if you're using that time to, build a strong foundation for your future. It's all about intentionality.
Totally. But let's be real, it's not always sunshine and rainbows out there. I mean, think about the pressure to become financially independent these days. It's a whole different ballgame than it used to be.
Oh, absolutely. Financial stability is huge. And it's no surprise that we're seeing more young adults living with their parents longer to, make ends meet.
Yeah, that whole boomerang generation thing.
Exactly. But that can be a bit of a tightrope walk, trying to balance that parental support with the need to carve out your own independent life. It's definitely a challenge.
It's like you're an adult, but you're also still kind of living under your parents' roof, so there's this constant negotiation of roles and responsibilities. I remember when I graduated college, I moved back in with my parents for a bit to save money. It was great to have their support, but there were definitely some moments where it felt like I was back in high school.
I bet. I can only imagine. It's all about finding that sweet spot between maintaining those close family bonds and establishing your own sense of autonomy.
So, listener, I'm curious, what does your path to adulthood look like? Are you taking the scenic route or are you speeding towards those traditional milestones? What unique challenges are you facing? Let us know. We'd love to hear from you.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about health. You might be surprised to hear that a whopping 96% of adults between 19 and 24 report being in good to excellent health. You guys are in your prime.
It's true. You're basically superheroes at this point.
You're invincible.
Right. But here's the thing. Even superheroes have their weaknesses. And our source material points out some serious health risks that are kind of lurking beneath the surface for emerging adults.
Yeah, unfortunately, accidents are actually the leading cause of death in this age group, with car crashes topping the list,
Oh, wow.
followed by suicides and homicides. It's a sobering reminder that even when you feel invincible, it's important to be aware of the dangers out there.
It's definitely a reality check. And it's not just about physical health either. Mental health is just as important. And it seems like it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue for emerging adults these days.
Sadly, you're right. We're seeing a rise in depression rates during this period, particularly for women.
Is that right?
And the pandemic, didn't help. All that isolation, job uncertainty, just general upheaval of daily life. It took a huge toll on everyone's mental health, but it seems to have hit young adults especially hard.
It's true. It was a lot to deal with. And I think sometimes there's this pressure to have it all figured out, to be adulting perfectly. But the reality is everyone struggles at times.
Yeah, it's so important to remember that. There's no shame in asking for help if you're feeling overwhelmed or struggling with your mental health. It's a sign of strength, not weakness.
100%. Now, even though emerging adults are physically in their prime, modern life has its own sneaky ways of, undermining our health, right? It's like a constant battle between your superhero self and those kryptonite
Or
habits.
tell me about it. Obesity rates have skyrocketed worldwide since 1975. We're talking triple the numbers. It's a combination of things, really. Maybe you're moving out on your own for the first time, living on a tighter budget. So suddenly fast food seems like the easiest option.
Right. Who has time to cook elaborate meals when you're juggling work, school, and trying to maintain some semblance of a social life?
Exactly. But here's the good news. Even small changes to your diet and exercise routine can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
It's not about becoming a marathon runner overnight. It's about finding those little swaps that fit into your life,
Little things. Yeah.
like taking the stairs instead of the elevator or packing a healthy lunch a couple of times a week.
Totally. Small changes can really add up over time. And speaking of things that add up, can we talk about sleep deprivation? I mean, I know pulling all-nighters was practically a sport in college, but it turns out those sleep debts can have some serious
They're
consequences.
telling me sleep deprivation doesn't just make you feel tired. It messes with your attention, memory, emotions. It can even impair your driving skills as much as being drunk.
Oh, wow. Scary stuff.
Yeah, scary stuff.
I think I need to reevaluate my sleep schedule after hearing that. So, listener, let's be honest with ourselves for a second. How are your health habits really stacking up? Are you getting enough sleep, eating well, moving your body? These are things we all struggle with, but taking a moment to assess where you're at can make a world of difference.
Now let's talk about relationships, shall we?
Yeah.
They're pretty much everything during emerging adulthood, wouldn't you say?
Oh, totally. It's like this whole new chapter of relationship drama unfolds. Figuring out friendships, navigating romantic relationships, maybe even redefining your relationship with your parents. It's a lot.
Right. Let's start with parents. The research actually shows that having a close and supportive relationship with your parents is linked to higher self-worth. It's amazing how that parental bond continues to impact us, even as we're becoming adults.
It really does make a difference. But it's also a time when we're, trying to find our own independence, right?
Yeah.
Especially financially. And that can sometimes create some tension, wouldn't you say?
For sure. It's that age-old struggle between wanting your parents' support and wanting to prove that you can do it on your own.
Right.
And, with the rising cost of living, more young adults are choosing to live with their parents longer. While it can be a great way to save money and get some extra help,
Yeah.
it also means navigating those boundaries and expectations all over again.
Exactly. Like, okay, I'm an adult, but I'm also living under your roof, so let's figure out this whole dynamic.
Right, right. It's all about communication and setting those clear expectations. But hey, at least you probably have some funny stories to tell afterward, right?
Oh, definitely. Okay, so let's move on to friendships. Are those changing too during this phase of life?
Absolutely. Emerging adulthood is actually when your friendship network peaks. You're meeting new people constantly, exploring different social circles, figuring out who you really connect with.
Yeah.
But it's also a time when friendships can be a little more unstable than during adolescence or later adulthood.
How so?
Mostly because people are moving around so much. You might be in a new city for school or a job. Your friends are scattered all over the place. It's a lot of change.
I totally get that. It's like you're building this amazing network of friends, but then everyone graduates or moves away and you have to start all over again.
Right. It's all part of the adventure, but it can be challenging for sure. Oh, and here's something interesting our source pointed out about friendships. There are some pretty distinct differences between how men and women approach friendship.
Oh, tell me more. I'm all ears.
Well, women tend to prioritize those deeper emotional connections in their friendships. They're more likely to share their feelings, offer support, and really dive deep into those heart-to-heart conversations.
Yeah.
Men, on the other hand, often bond through shared activities like playing sports, going to concerts, that kind of thing. It's not that they don't value emotional connection. It's just that they tend to express it differently.
Interesting. So different love languages, but for friendship.
Exactly. And then there's this fascinating concept of fictive kin,
Yeah.
those friends who become like family.
Oh, I love that.
It's especially common for people who move away from home and are building their support systems from scratch. It's like creating your own chosen family.
So true. It's like you may not be related by blood, but you've chosen each other, and those bonds can be just as strong, if not stronger.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of strong bonds, let's talk about romantic love. Remember how we were talking about all those different paths to adulthood?
Yeah.
Well, those different paths also influence how people approach love and relationships.
Makes sense. Like, are you looking for a long-term partner? Are you open to casual dating? Are you figuring out your own sexual orientation? It's a time of exploration and figuring out what works for you.
Right. And romantic love itself is kind of this universal human experience. Our source material points out that it exists in pretty much every culture around the world, which is kind of beautiful when you think about it.
It is. But of course, there are some cultural and gender differences in how love plays out. Like, I know in some cultures, arranged marriages are still common, while in others, it's all about finding love on your own.
Absolutely. And even within the same culture, men and women often have different expectations and priorities when it comes to
Oh,
love.
for sure.
For example, women tend to place a higher value on emotional intimacy and feeling understood by their partner, while men are often more focused on passion and physical attraction. It's not that these are hard and fast rules, but it's interesting to see how those gender differences play out.
It's like we're all speaking different dialects of the language of love.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And then you've got all these new relationship styles emerging, like friends with benefits, where the lines between friendship and romance get a little blurry.
It's true.
It's all about navigating those evolving norms
Yeah.
and figuring out what feels right for you. But hey, isn't that what emerging adulthood is all about? Exploring different possibilities, figuring out who you are and what you want out of life?
I think you nailed it. Okay, listener, get ready because in the next part, we're diving headfirst into the world of marriage, cohabitation, and the big question, to have kids or not to have kids. That is the question.
Stay tuned, folks. This deep dive is just getting started.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Before the break, we were getting all lovey-dovey talking about romantic relationships and those like ever-evolving norms. But love isn't the only thing that shapes our decisions as emerging adults, right? I mean, our sense of right and wrong, our values, those are all kind of evolving too, aren't they?
Oh, for sure. It's like as we mature, our ideas about like morality and ethics, they become more nuanced, more complex. It's not just about following rules anymore. It's about like developing our own internal compass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And our source material actually mentioned this psychologist, Kohlberg, who came up with these stages of moral development. Apparently, the final stage is all about like developing these universal principles of justice, which he believed most people didn't even reach until their 20s, if at all.
Yeah, isn't that wild? Like, are we really walking around making moral decisions based on a completely different set of values than we did when we were like 15?
Yeah.
Makes you think.
It really does. But, even though those theories are super interesting, I wonder how much they apply to everyone, regardless of like their background or culture. It seems like our upbringing and the values we're exposed to must play a huge role in shaping our moral compass, right?
Oh, absolutely. Our moral reasoning isn't formed in a vacuum. It's influenced by our families, our communities, our cultural beliefs. Like, what's considered right in one culture might be totally different in another. It's all about context.
Okay, so let's say you've got your moral compass pointed in the right direction. You're navigating those relationship waters. What's next on the emerging adulthood agenda?
Oh, I know. Education.
You got it. Higher education is a huge milestone for a lot of emerging adults. And it's interesting to see how the trends are changing. For one thing, college enrollment rates have been steadily climbing, and we're actually seeing a reversal of the traditional gender gap.
Wait, really? So more women are going to college now than men. That's amazing. I guess those girls just want to have fun.
Mm.
Stereotypes are officially busted.
Totally. And they're not just going to college, they're like kicking butt and taking names. Women are now earning more degrees at all levels, including those in fields that were once considered male-dominated, like STEM fields. It's awesome to see those barriers being broken down. You go, girls. But I'm also curious about something. Even though more people are enrolling in college, what about actually finishing? I feel like I've heard that graduation rates aren't always that high.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Sadly, only about 60% of students who start at a four-year college actually graduate within 6 years. And it gets even more complicated when you look at the differences in graduation rates based on, like, race and ethnicity. There are some pretty significant disparities there, which points to the systemic challenges that many students face.
It's a reminder that simply providing access to education isn't enough. We need to create a system that supports students from all backgrounds and helps them succeed.
Absolutely. Things like having a strong support system, access to financial resources, and feeling like you belong at your college can make a huge difference in whether or not a student completes their degree. And let's not forget about the impact of the pandemic. That threw a major wrench in the whole higher education system and likely had a ripple effect on both enrollment and graduation rates.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how those long-term effects play out. Now, for those who do make it through college, what's waiting for them on the other side, specifically in the world of work?
Well, here's the good news. Having a college degree still opens up a lot of doors in the job market and typically translates to higher earnings. Like in the US, the difference in median income between someone with a master's degree or higher and someone with just a high school diploma is pretty substantial.
So even though college can be expensive and time-consuming, it's still a worthwhile investment in the long run.
For many people, yes. But here's the thing. The nature of work itself is changing so rapidly. Gone are the days of, like, staying at one company for your entire career. These days, it's all about adaptability, being willing to learn new skills, and maybe even embracing, like, the gig economy or freelance work.
It's like the whole job for life concept is going the way of the dinosaurs.
Exactly. Emerging adults are entering the workforce at a time when flexibility and a constant willingness to learn are more important than ever.
And you know what's really cool? The type of work you do actually impacts your cognitive development.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah.
You're telling me my job can make me smarter? Tell me more.
It's true. Our source called it substantive complexity, basically, the degree to which your job requires you to think critically, solve problems, and make decisions independently. The more challenging your work is, the more it stretches your cognitive abilities. It's like a mental workout for your brain.
So, if I want to keep my brain sharp, I should be looking for a job that constantly challenges me and pushes me outside of my comfort zone.
You got it.
Yeah.
And there's even this spillover hypothesis, which suggests that the cognitive benefits of challenging work can spill over into your leisure time, making you more intellectually curious and engaged in your hobbies and personal interests, like a win-win. I love that. Work that makes you smarter and more interesting? Sign me up. Okay, so we've talked about education and work, but there's another huge part of emerging adulthood that we haven't really touched on yet. The social and emotional landscape. Like, how do people navigate love, marriage, cohabitation, and even the possibility of starting a family during this time?
Those are all great questions, and we're going to dive into them head first in the next part of the deep dive. We'll explore how relationships evolve, what makes marriages work or not, and the factors that lead to both happiness and, let's face it, sometimes heartbreak.
So grab another cup of coffee, get comfy, and get ready for the final part of our deep dive into emerging adulthood.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. We're in the final stretch of our exploration of emerging adulthood, and now it's time to tackle the big stuff. Love, marriage, kids, and all the messy, beautiful complexities that come with it.
It's like we're entering the relationship Olympics. Get ready for a roller coaster of emotions, evolving expectations, and maybe even a few broken hearts along the way. Okay, so let's start with the whole marriage thing. It seems like everyone's either tying the knot or opting out completely. What's the deal with this whole to marry or not to marry debate?
Well, it's definitely a hot topic, right? And it's not just about finding the right person. Societal expectations, cultural norms, even economic factors, they all play a huge role in shaping people's decisions about marriage.
Right. Like in some cultures, marriage is practically a given, while in others, it's seen as more of a choice. And even within the same culture, things are changing. We're seeing more people choosing to delay marriage, maybe focusing on their careers first, or even deciding to stay single altogether.
Yeah, it's fascinating how the landscape is shifting. And you know what? This trend of staying single is particularly noticeable among African American women and folks from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Our source material dives into some of the reasons behind this.
Ooh, I'm all ears. What are some of the factors driving this trend?
Well, for many women, it's about prioritizing their own personal and professional goals. They're ambitious, they want to achieve their dreams, and they don't necessarily see marriage as a prerequisite for happiness or fulfillment.
I can totally relate to that. Like, who says you need a ring on your finger to feel like you've made it? But I'm guessing it's not always like a purely personal choice, right? There are probably some external pressures at play too.
Definitely. For some, it's about financial stability. Marriage can be expensive, and if you're already struggling to make ends meet, adding a partner and potentially kids to the mix might seem really overwhelming. And then there's the fear of divorce, right? Let's be honest, nobody wants to go through a painful breakup. And for some, staying single feels like a way to protect themselves from that potential heartache.
It's like a better safe than sorry approach to love.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's the simple fact that sometimes you just haven't met the right person yet. It's not about rejecting marriage altogether. It's about waiting for a relationship that feels truly right, you know? And that's totally okay.
So true. There's no need to rush into anything just because society tells you to. Okay, so let's say you do find that special someone. You take the plunge and get hitched. What are the secrets to making a marriage work, especially in this crazy, fast-paced world we live in?
Well, our source material really emphasized the importance of good communication. And I don't just mean talking, I mean really listening to each other, understanding your partner's perspective, and being willing to work through conflicts in a healthy way.
It's like those relationship gurus always say, communication is key, but I'm guessing it takes more than just talking, right? What about all those like unspoken expectations and emotional needs that people bring into a marriage?
You're spot on. Those unspoken expectations can definitely trip people up. Like our source mentioned that women tend to value emotional expressiveness more than men. They want to feel understood and cared for, not just on a practical level, but on an emotional level too.
It's about feeling seen and heard, right? Like knowing that your partner gets you, even if they don't always agree with you.
Exactly. And it goes both ways, right?
Hmm.
Men need to feel respected and appreciated by their partners. It's about finding that balance between expressing your own needs and making sure your partner feels valued and understood.
Okay, so let's say you've mastered the art of communication, you're feeling all loved up. Now comes the big question. Kids, no kids, fur babies. What's the deal with parenthood in the age of emerging adulthood?
Well, one thing's for sure. The whole having kids is a given mentality is definitely changing. We're seeing declining birth rates across many developed countries, and people are choosing to have children later in life or even not at all.
Yeah, it's like the whole life script is being rewritten.
Yeah.
But why are people holding off on parenthood? Is it all about like avocado toast and fancy lattes? Or are there deeper reasons behind this shift?
There are definitely some economic factors at play. Raising kids is expensive. And with the rising cost of everything from housing to childcare, it's no wonder people are hesitant to take on that financial burden.
Right. Kids these days come with a hefty price tag. But I'm guessing it's not just about money, right?
Absolutely not. For many people, it's about wanting to achieve their own personal and professional goals before bringing children into the mix. They want to travel, build their careers, and feel like they've established themselves as individuals before taking on the responsibility of parenthood.
It's like they want to make sure their own oxygen masks are securely fastened before helping others, right?
Exactly. And let's not forget about those who choose to remain child-free by choice. It's important to acknowledge that parenthood isn't the only path to a fulfilling life. Some people simply don't feel the desire to have children, and that's perfectly okay.
Yes, you do you. Now, for those who do become parents, how does that little bundle of joy impact the whole love and marriage equation?
Well, get ready for some real talk, because the research shows that marital satisfaction often takes a nosedive after having kids.
Wait, seriously, I thought babies were supposed to bring couples closer together. What gives?
It's not that babies are like relationship destroyers or anything. It's just that they bring a whole new level of stress and responsibility into the mix. Sleep deprivation, less time for each other, the constant demands of childcare. It can put a strain on even the strongest relationships.
It's like your relationship goes from a romantic comedy to a survival reality show overnight.
That's a great way to put it. And often it leads to a more traditional division of labor, even in couples who were pretty egalitarian before kids. The woman ends up taking on more of the childcare and housework, even if she's also working full-time, which can lead to resentment and feeling overwhelmed.
Ugh, that sounds exhausting. So what's the secret sauce to surviving parenthood without sacrificing your relationship?
Communication.
Well,
Communication. Communication. It's more important than ever to keep those lines of communication open, express your needs, and make sure you're both feeling supported and appreciated.
and maybe invest in a good coffee maker. Now, we can't talk about love and marriage without addressing the big D word, divorce. While nobody goes into a marriage expecting it to end, the reality is that it happens. But I'm curious, what are the trends we're seeing with divorce these days?
Well, here's an interesting tidbit. The divorce rate in the U.S. has actually been declining since the 1970s.
Wait, really? But I feel like everyone's getting divorced these days.
It's a bit of a paradox. Part of it might be due to people getting married later in life, which statistically is linked to greater marital stability. Higher education levels also seem to play a role. But there's a twist. While the overall divorce rate is down, the rate for adults over 35 has actually been increasing in recent years.
So it's like the later you get married, the less likely you are to get divorced. But if you do get divorced, it's probably happening when you're a bit older.
Exactly. It's a reminder that relationships are complex, and even long-term marriages can face challenges and ultimately end. And it's not about pointing fingers or blaming anyone. It's about recognizing that sometimes, despite our best efforts, things don't work out the way we planned.
That's a really important point. Divorce is rarely a simple or easy decision, and it's definitely not a failure. Okay, so let's say a relationship does end in divorce. What are some of the common reasons why couples call it quits?
Well, incompatibility is a big one. That feeling of being on different pages, wanting different things out of life. Lack of emotional support is another major factor. And sadly, sometimes it's due to more serious issues like, spousal abuse. It's important to remember that divorce is never the answer to an abusive relationship, and there are resources available to help people escape those situations safely.
That's a crucial point. And of course, there are the more classic reasons like financial strain or infidelity, which can definitely rock the foundation of a marriage. It's like there's this whole web of interconnected factors that can contribute to a relationship breaking down.
It's rarely about just one single thing. It's usually a combination of issues that have built up over time.
So, what happens after the dust settles? How do people pick up the pieces and move on after a divorce?
Well, it's definitely a process, and it's different for everyone. There's often a lot of emotional baggage to unpack, especially if there are children involved.
Mm-hmm.
But our source material emphasized the importance of self-care, building a strong support network, and allowing yourself time to grieve the loss of the relationship.
It's like giving yourself permission to feel all the feels, right? Not trying to rush through the healing process or pretend that everything's okay when it's not.
Exactly. And it's also a time for rediscovering yourself as an individual, figuring out what you want your next chapter to look like. Some people find solace in reconnecting with old friends, pursuing new hobbies, or even, diving headfirst into their careers.
It's like a chance to hit the reset button and create a life that truly reflects who you are now, not who you were in the past.
And you know what? A lot of people actually find happiness and fulfillment after divorce. They build new relationships, create new families, and discover a sense of strength and resilience they never knew they had.
That's so inspiring. It's like a reminder that even when life throws you a curveball, you can still come out on top.
Well, dear listener, we've reached the end of our deep dive into emerging adulthood. We've covered a lot of ground, from the ups and downs of relationships to the challenges of building a career and finding your place in the world.
It's been a wild ride, but hopefully you've learned a few things along the way, gained some new insights, and maybe even had a few aha moments.
Remember, emerging adulthood is a journey of self-discovery. It's about embracing the unknown, navigating the complexities, and ultimately writing your own unique story.
So keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the world around you. Until next time, fellow deep divers.